From everybody to the American Space Museum, I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us to stay curious. Today we're going to talk about this bad boy behind us, the Buran Russian Space Shuttle, which has been attached, it's gotten the curiosity of ASM friend and former Apollo and shuttle structural engineer Gary Allgire.
Pleasure to be here again today.
Gary, it's always a pleasure to have you here. Our Stay Curious listeners love what you bring to our program. He worked for 35 years
33.
almost? 33 years. Tell us what you did.
Well, I worked on the Apollo program on the Apollo spacecraft and service module. And then after the ASTP, when we docked with the Russians, went over to the space shuttle as the lead structural engineer and worked on the shuttle for most of my career after that until I retired in 2001.
Now, Gary told me a structural engineer. I go, what's that, Gary? And you told me what?
I own everything except anything that has electrons going through it or fluids.
Okay.
So.
And so he is you're curious about the Buran, which
Yes.
35 years ago flew for the one and done flight in 1985, or 88,
Yeah.
88. A lot of space geeks think they know about this vehicle, but watch this program till the end. You're going to find out this was Premier Brezhnev's answer to our shuttle, and it was a bomber.
Yes, it was a weapon system is what it was going to end up being. But I was curious because everybody that has talked about the Buran says it was a better shuttle than ours. And so I wanted to look at it and see, is it really better than ours?
And they said that why?
Because it could land without having any astronauts in it.
It did its 2 orbits in November
that is
'88,
correct. Yes,
unmanned,
yes.
uncrewed.
And it's a false statement because our shuttle would have landed with nobody in it automatically except for the astronauts. They said, we will not have that happen. And to make that happen, they took one thing out of the computer landing system, and that was the lowering of the landing gear. And so that's a manual switch, and that's the only reason why we have to have astronauts aboard.
I believe the pilot flipped that
The
switch
pilot
or
flipped
whatever.
the switch as they come.
As the commander's
Yes.
flying the thing.
Yes.
And that thinking of computers in a shuttle, gives me a segue to say hello to Marty Winkle, our producer here. Marty and I are entering our 4th year, Gary. We're so delighted that we've attracted wonderful authorities like you. Marty, how you doing today?
I'm doing just ducky, Mark.
Good.
After working on the computer.
Yes, we had a little snafu, and thank you to Trekkie Techie. She fixed the computer problem, and Marty was right on top of it and knew it was a near fatal thing going on there, but we actually had to pull out some of the computer parts and pieces and blow the dust out, and everything's working good today. So tell your friends to watch us on YouTube as we monetize that chart. As we're looking at this we're going to see a lot of pictures about Buran. You're going to see some you've never seen before, but a lot of them come from a group of people that have been trespassing on the property at Kazakhstan. YouTube is full of their clandestine type of entrance into these facilities. But we're kind of glad they did because no one would know the horrible shape they're in.
That's true. And what we have today is a collection of those pictures that they have taken since they got into the facilities. And it's not an easy thing. They have to trek 12 hours at night, walking across the desert, and carry their own food, their water, their camping equipment. And they can sneak in, and most of them stay over a day or 2 days, but some of them will go in there and get there in the morning and leave that evening. So it's a very, very treacherous thing. Most of these people are fairly young. We actually have 2 women that has done this trek also. But so that's how we get most of these pictures. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get information about the Buran and their energy support system that launched it. So I try to gather up as much as we can. I analyze it from an engineering standpoint to see how they compared building their shuttle versus our space shuttle, and I'll address some of those issues in there that I've seen.
Tremendous. And we're going to start the slideshow and listen to Gary. I want him to comment about this our green screen here. We know what that reminds me on the bottom is a carburetor that needs a new
Yes.
not filter, new what you put between
Manifold.
yeah,
Uh,
on there.
Base plate. The Russians are very, very big on horizontal processing versus most of our programs. We do vertical processing, and it makes for, to me, a very complicated system to do this, and they spent probably just as much money developing that horizontal to vertical system that we'll talk about later. But this is the picture right now that you see is it's in the process of going from horizontal to the vertical position at the pad. This pad was also used for Gagarin's first launch, and it's located fairly close to where they processed the shuttle and also the segments in the main section of their Energia rocket. And we'll go through that process. And
good. That is the Energia rocket
yeah.
that's poised there. Let's crank up our pictures here.
Yeah.
Show. I want to go back to that one real
Yeah.
quick. Gary explained this beautiful picture at night. It was launched at night,
Yes.
strapped to the Energia rocket, and those are like a bunch of tubes attached.
Now the
to it.
tubes, one of them, the top one, the round tube, goes to the we call the white room, and that's how the crew gets access into their shuttle. And then there's another tube, and it looks like it slides. There's a slide. It goes down into the base of the launch pad in case they board on pad, and then if they have time to get out before it blows up. Now the first crew that flew it actually had injection seats, but this is the unmanned version of it. But they were going to fly 4 Buran flights before they would put cosmonauts in it to fly.
Cosmonauts probably appreciated that.
Yeah.
So here's the comparison. Gee, Gary, it kind of looks like our space shuttle.
It does.
How many KGB agents you think were in Titusville in the 80s?
Well, there was not there, but there were some in Washington D.C. And if you go over to Moscow tomorrow and you go to their museum where they have a display and they talk about their Buran, this guide will tell you that the reason why it looks like our shuttle is just it's not because we copied it. It's just because when you do all the calculations and use the secret sauce to build one of these, that's what it would look like.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not true. First of all, our space shuttle that NASA really wanted didn't look anything like that. In fact, if you come to the American Space Museum, you can see some of the models of some of the proposed shapes and sizes of the space shuttle. It was all dictated, this vehicle was dictated by the Air Force. They wanted a certain length of a payload bay. They wanted a certain amount of cross range, and the cross range is what dictated the double delta wings. And then, of course, they wanted to fly with nobody in it, but that's what the astronauts did. And the Russians really didn't pay much attention to the shuttle at the very beginning. But then when the Air Force got involved, they woke them up a little bit. And then the kicker was when the Air Force decided they were going to launch out of Vandenberg Air Force Base. And with doing that, they could go, not even complete an orbit. They could launch, deploy their whatever they were going to deploy, and come back in and land at Vandenberg without the Russians would ever know it. And so their military had a secret meeting with Leonid Brezhnev, who was in charge of Russia at the time, and told him that they were concerned that the Americans would be flying this over Moscow, and it could have some weapons in it, or they could capture some of their satellites. So he authorized the Buran project, which has kicked that off. Now they were way behind us in development. And so what they did is they had another agency that did all their secret design work for all their payloads. At this time, the internet system was coming up online, and so they went in and they broke into a lot of the university computers and also NASA computers and labs to find what data they could find. Now they had some experience from this because that's what they did when the French and the British were building the Concorde. They went in there and they had a spy, and he captured all their documents and drawings and brought it back to Russia. So it helped them build their Tu-144. So they were going to do that here, and so when they tapped into our system, they ended up finding out that NASA was putting out unclassified documentation and proposals about what the shuttle would look like. So once they noticed that, they started tracking the titles of the documents and also the number for that document. And once they had that, then they would contact a KGB agent in Washington, D.C. in the embassy. He would go down to the U.S. government's printing office, and he would give them that title and that number, and he would pay to have that printed, and he would gather that cut document up, bring it back, and then they would clandestinely ship it over to Moscow for their engineers to go through it. They ended up getting 3,000 of our documents that way. But the real one that they really, really drove them was NASA put out the wind tunnel data on the wings. And that saved them a lot of money because they used that data to develop their wing.
Very interesting. Well, Gary's going to take us to Kazakhstan where this thing is. These things are. Please strap on here at the end. We're going to show you the military application for this.
I can't really. I know. There's 4 numbers on here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. That was the 4 facilities that they use out at the Baikonur. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
Baikonur. And the number 4 is the actual launch pad. And then if you go back up to 1 at the very top, that is a horizontal processing facility for the Energia rocket. There was a main core with engines on it, and then there was 4 strap-ons. And they were processed basically horizontally. And then once they were completed, then they would, by rail, they had 4 locomotives attached to the devices, and they would pull them down to number 2, which was a vertical processing facility. And what they would do is the launch platform would have already been positioned in that building, and then they would rotate from horizontal to vertically each segment and install it into this launch platform. And once that was completed, they would roll back out, and then they would translate from vertical to horizontal. And then by rail, they would go over to number 3, where the Buran would be sitting. They would raise it up off of the ground, and then they would pull the Energia underneath of it, and then they would mate it. And once that was completed and checked out, then they would roll to the pad. And then there they would go vertical.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now this is a view looking from the item number 3, which is where the Burans were located. 2 is that vertical processing facility. It was the tallest facility there. It was almost 550 feet tall. Wow. And then number 1 is the where they would process their Energia. There was 2 bays in there, so they could do 2 at a time. They doubled up on everything. You'll see here later.
That's VAB size, tall length there, not wide and.
But not wide, no. It was just.
Is this a 5-year-old picture or something like that?
I don't know when this was taken. This was taken from some of those people that go sneak in. All the facilities are in very, very poor shape. Again, you can see this building. The brown area, that is this right here, is the door, and that swings out. Well, I go this way, yes. Swings out on that arm out there, so that they can get this vertical stack out of the building. And there is a verification vehicle. It's not a real of an energy. They call it the M3. There's like 4 different versions that they were proposing to do certain different things, but there's one in there, but it's not real. And this is looking from number 2 there, looking back at 3. The building is in very, very poor shape. It's not being maintained. There's nobody in it. It's been gutted. Looters have been in there over the years and have taken out anything of any value, any copper or anything, instrumentation or anything that's out there. The walls, the paint's peeling on it. Everything's rusting. But that's it. Now looking back from number 3, the vertical processing facility, I will call it, you can see the pad there. That's pad number 110 or 63, I think is the other number. But anyway, that's where it would roll out to, and that's where it would be erected, and they launched from there.
It's a night launch, not many pictures of that, but they did a lot of tests beforehand. Now,
Well, back in the 60s, they were looking at the glide, the lifting body concepts. And so they had envisioned to have this was a single piloted vehicle that eventually they could supposedly send into orbit. They never did. They did a bunch of drop tests off of one of the Bison bomber, and basically the same thing we did at Edwards with our lifting bodies. But they were going to re-erect that once Brezhnev said, let's do this. They thought, well, we'll go back and we'll see if that worked, because it had been discontinued. But then they realized that it was not a shuttle, so they canceled that part of the program again.
Mm-hmm.
Now this
we missed. Yeah, we actually skipped a picture. There,
that's okay. Yeah, we're there. This is an actual vehicle. This is equivalent to our Enterprise, where we did the approach and landing test off the back of a 747 out at Edwards. This is at Baikonur. And what they have done, the original concept of their space shuttle had 2 engines, one on each side of the vertical tail. And once they re-entered the atmosphere, there's a little door that closes up the intake part of that engine. And it would flip down, and then they would power up the engines, and then they could glide and power themselves around, and that way they could make sure that they could make it to the runway.
Now this is a Buran size,
Right?
which we're talking. I'll give you some dimensions here in a second, but as the novices like I am look at this, one of the first things you notice different from the shuttle is the location of that nose wheel.
And I'll talk to that in a second. But it has the 2 engines they discovered was not enough power to fly that particular model. And it is a full-scale model of the Buran. And so they added 2 more engines on the side. They're down below, and you can see the one that's grayish looking. It did have an afterburner to it, and they flew this model 25 times, doing approach and landing with cosmonauts aboard. And it had enough fuel that they could only fly for 30 minutes. But that's what they did. Now, the nose landing gear is unique compared to our space shuttle. Our space shuttle, the landing gear is up forward underneath the forward OMS pod, whereas theirs is located behind the flight deck on theirs. Now, I think the reason why they did that overall is for this vehicle to really fly, they had to fly an extended length nose wheel system. Because of what they had found is set on the runway, it had an upward angle, like we used to do on aircraft carriers. To get the plane up a little quicker, they would raise the nose up during it taking off. So they used that, and if they had been in the forward position, there would not have been enough room to, like on ours, there was not enough room to put that extended landing gear. Now, the original Buran, this gear did not extend as far, but that's the major difference between our shuttles and theirs. And it's the landing gear position and also the 4 engines.
These shuttles are about 122 feet long. Okay, give you a dimension size. They're 122 feet, 78-foot wingspan there. So there it is again in flight with a chase plane. Marty, you've got a question for Gary Allgire.
Yeah, Gary. The center of gravity would be different with the 4 engines in the back. Wouldn't that be part of the reason? Bring the nose landing gear further back?
No, I don't think that only had any problem to that. It's just that the location of their forward OMS pod, there was not enough room. And again, this had a longer landing gear nose system than the one that they actually flew in orbit. So I think that had more to do with that than anything. It could just be balanced back out by putting different weight cages inside the payload bay. They had plenty of carrying capability as far as the shuttle. Their shuttle was actually they could carry more weight into orbit than we could.
Yes, that's we're going to talk about that. But here is that prototype, their Enterprise, in a German museum.
It's in Germany, and you can tour. They have one payload bay door closed, and then they have another one open, and we'll see inside there a little bit here. But the main thing physically, if you look at it from the outside and you compare it to our space shuttle, the elevons on this vehicle, their vehicles, was much larger. I would say it was 50% larger than ours. I really don't know why. I'm not an aerodynamics person, so
That's the panels at the bottom. Here, with the separation. Actually, ours has got 3 sets.
No, there's only. It's the same. No, it's the same.
Oh,
it's
okay.
2. Yeah, 2 and 2. They just don't have the little we call tail feathers.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Okay. Now this is back. The assembly of the Buran and all the other their shuttles was done in Moscow, and I don't know where in Moscow it was, but that's where they did it. And then they are airshipped up on the back of the Antonov 225 to Baikonur and then offloaded. And then some of them they finished completing the assembly of it in that building number 3, like we did with our OPFs.
Mm-hmm. You were very impressed seeing pictures of the magnitude of their orbital processing facilities, as well as you said they're a little more sophisticated than ours, or
no, I would say not,
or more convenient.
I would
Okay.
I would not say that, but this building here is.
Well, you said something that you liked them, not to.
Well,
wrong.
it's interesting that what they did, and they did not. They looked at it from a different perspective than we did. They looked at it from a weapons system platform, not from a scientific and to launch commercial payloads. Now, this building is 14 stories tall. It has offices everywhere, and these people that go out there, they walk through all those offices, and they are just in really, really poor
Mm.
condition. And I don't know how long it'll last before they have issues with that building. Now, there's two Burans in there. I'll call them Burans. One of them is a prototype. It's a non-flyable unit. And then there's another one called Pichka instead of Buran. If you look at this vehicle, the one closest to the bottom of the screen is a prototype. It's non-flyable, whereas on the one behind it is Pichka, and it was 95% complete before they abandoned the program. And you can see how dirty they get and rusty, and people can get into, it's very easy to get into the prototype. I haven't seen any pictures from people who've been in the other vehicle, but it's pretty high fidelity inside the vehicle or the unit when they get in there, and they've busted the upper windows that are on the aft flight deck, and people do crawl out through those windows, and they do walk on top of the payload bay doors.
And Gary's going to tell us about the sad fate of Buran itself. So,
well, we'll get
this
that.
This is inside the cockpit.
This is the cockpit of the one that it was a flyable one at the time, had the jet engines. Well, take that back. This is the prototype, but it was a mock-up of the one that it was flown off the runways and not the deal. This is a mock-up of what the flight deck should have looked like. And they trained with this is comparable to ours. We used a lot of electronics, flat pane computer windows, and they used all analog and stuff like that. They weren't as sophisticated as ours.
Gary, maybe just set the stage. Our shuttle was approved in 1972.
Yeah.
The money was approved for it. Did not fly until April 12th, 1981.
81.
That's when the Russians realized that we could have a weapon of war.
Yes.
And they were going to have one. And then Buran flew 7 years after our shuttle.
Yeah, they flew the 88 was when it flew. And then the one that Pichka was going to fly in 91.
Okay, I just wanted to establish that timeline there for you there. So we're looking inside the payload bay. We've talked about the trenches there where they're leaning over with the avionics, wires and things like that.
Yeah, they use the same type of center platforms to get access. Now, now the big difference between our OPF and whatever these facilities, I can't tell you which one it is. They have very, very limited access to the sill lines runs where the payloads would be attached. The wire trays are completely different. The tank locations and everything else. Now, definitely it's going to be different in the aft because they don't have the SSME engines in there, so they just have two engines that are used to slow
External
down
engines, yeah.
external to take them out of orbit for landing. And you can see how some of the tanks are held, and it's a different approach than ours. One of the things I sort of noticed, and I couldn't actually confirm, is they didn't use blankets to close out that area for flight, and they were just actually had metal plates over there on top of most of it. Now this is the one that's in Germany, and it just shows the latches that hold the door closed once they close, and it's kind of different, totally different concept than what we did. Ours seemed to be a little more compact and better. I would say technically looks more improved than what these
Yeah, I was
are.
gonna say the word crude, like where
Yeah,
you get
I
these
didn't want
off
to
the
say
shelf
that,
in
but-
Home Depot
Yeah.
and part of your garage door or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, it'd be interesting, like you said, to see the seal that they actually would
Yes.
be bringing down
Yeah.
on that. But we're talking with Gary Allgire here for 33 years. He was a NASA structural engineer, so he's very interested in how these space shuttles for Russia were built. The one and done Buran flew 35 years ago this November. Chances are he might have you back for that, Gary.
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated. I've learned so much that I never knew before. And again, they're in the whole complex out there, Kazakhstan at Baikonur is in disrepair. They do not want to put any money or fix it or anything. These pictures are from daring people that have gone out there as ultimate space geeks, kind of in a way,
Yes, they are.
to show what Russia doesn't want us to see.
Yeah, and they also almost all, I haven't seen English speaking people to go out there, but they're all, I don't know, you're Europeans, I don't know, I understand the language, but then sometimes there's translation that's been put on the screen, but it's kind of weird. But this is their payload bay, and it's constructed the same as our shuttles are. I don't see much difference other than the wire tray. One big difference now, I don't know if this is true for the actual Buran that flew. On the aft bulkhead back there at the end of the payload bay, there is a opening that you can pass through. And that's how these people get in. They'll climb up on the wing, and then where the tail service mast used to be for our shuttle, there is an opening that they could get into the aft compartment. And then they get in there, and then from there they can go through into the payload bay, and from the payload bay they can get into the crew compartment, and then they have to figure out how to climb up to get into the flight deck, and then from the flight deck they could actually go up through that broken window.
There's more electronics
Yeah.
here in these trays.
Well, I was interested in this. I didn't know how they attached their payloads. We had a thing called bridges, and they have a bridge, but it's nowhere near connected like the way we do it.
the yellow arrow there.
It's let me get over here. Let me
You
see.
got your yellow arrow
Oh,
there.
yeah, yellow arrow is pointing to it. It's the gray unit, and it actually rests on these little stobs that are sticking out on the main frames, whereas we physically bolt that in with four large bolts, and this is only held in with 2 bolts. And so I was just kind of curious how they allow for the
That's
expansion and
America's,
contraction.
and you see
Yeah, you can see the
gray.
bridges up there. There are silver items that are up on the left and the right. And at the base of there, there's some centerline platforms that are there temporarily, but right before that is a keel latch, and that holds the payloads from shifting from side to side. Okay, then you saw also 2 lights. Now this is the Buran. It's more configurable for the flight. They did put insulation on the forward bulkhead, and I saw today, I was looking on the internet, and the hatch actually operated so much different than ours, and they could physically open it up with their finger
Really?
and still do that today. on the prototype.
I'm thinking of our lead electrical engineer Marty that worked on the
Yeah.
Grumman lunar module. How about that mess of electronical wires there, Marty?
What do you think?
I mean, I've never seen a mess like that before on a vehicle. It's crazy.
Yeah, that gives you the heebie-jeebies
Yeah.
to see something like that there.
I mean, it didn't fly that way, but now they also, I've noticed that they did not have any radiators. I don't believe radiators were developed yet.
To get heat out of the vehicle.
Yeah, the heat. We used them. Now, just a little bit of a comparison on their windows. They were more square shaped, sharp angles. The interior windows
lattices.
were a little bit smaller than ours. So it was just a difference in design philosophy. And again, these are ours. Now, one thing I did want to point out is just to the left of the three windows close to us, you'll see two pockets there.
Depressions
Those were,
there.
Depressions. Those were star trackers, and so we used that to align the shuttle for experiment purposes and alignment for the shuttle in orbit. There's none of that on the Buran.
Those are covers in the wells
Yeah.
there, and like
Yes.
a small telescope is what they use to align.
Well,
with
it's a
certain
star
stars.
track. It lines to
Yeah.
they'll point to a certain star, and based on that position, they'll put that into the computer. The computer will tell them what angle that it should be flying at.
And because the Buran didn't have that, that tells you what?
It was more intended to be a bomber,
Okay.
basically.
If
I
it
mean,
would, because the
no.
scientific instruments needed that.
and they had no plans to do that. And the other thing that nobody
Fascinating, Gary.
never talk about is that there is another little door that's on the side, and when they get down into the atmosphere and down to a certain speed, it opens up and it exposes it pops out a air data probe and an angle of attack indicator.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether that's for their guidance.
I have seen that in pictures.
Have you seen it?
landing
Okay.
pictures
I don't
there.
know whether they had that or not on theirs.
Thank you, Marty. All right. On the pad is not Buran, but it's
No.
Energia with something special.
Yes, this is their laser gun that they were going to fly as a prototype, the answer to our Star Wars.
That's the black on the
black
right
on
there.
the
The black
side,
on the
yeah.
side is a Star Wars answer to the Reagan
Yeah.
administration.
The Buran, the Energia was capable. If you didn't have the shuttle on there, they could. You didn't have that. They could put 400 tons
400 tons
into orbit. It's a huge rocket, and they've only flew it twice. Once with this device, and unfortunately, when they released that off of the off of the Energia, the software was messed up, and instead of putting it in orbit, it deorbited.
It didn't work. And thank you, Marty. We've got a question.
Yeah, Z. Gubin's asking, is it known if Roscosmos plan to develop an IUS type of stage for Buran?
I've never seen anything as of that type.
He's talking about an inertial
Yeah,
upper stage
to go
which is
into geosync.
yeah, which is another order. We used the PAM in the beginning, then the IUS came on board.
Well, the PAM was not for geosync. I don't believe it was
okay.
it was more for a very long elliptical orbit. They were small rocket engines that were on communication satellites. They had to be rotated as they came out of the orbiter, and then they would fire them off, and except for the two that didn't go,
Right.
that we retrieved. But the
Yeah.
I lost my.
The IUS thing.
Oh yeah, IUS. There was no talk, no discussion about that. They were way behind in a lot of development. There was no fuel cells yet. They hadn't had the radiators. They had developed a fuel cell, I guess, for the moon mission, if they ever landed on that. I did see a picture, what was supposedly a fuel cell, and I couldn't recognize it.
Well, thanks for the question, Rock Keats. He is in Europe. He is
Okay.
involved with the Lunar Gateway project
Oh, okay.
for
Yeah.
as an ESA contractor there, and always has great questions for us there.
Yeah.
He's watching on Twitch, I believe. So Gary's going to tell us a bit something very fascinating about their side booster engines that
Yeah.
I'm sure none of you are going to know about. Go take it away, Gary.
Okay, there's 3 out of the 4 strap-on engines. There's rockets rather, and you'll see 4 nozzles. Now you would think that there's 4 rocket engines in there, wouldn't you? But it's not. It's one engine that has 4 nozzles. And so the question is, why do they have 4 nozzles instead of one big nozzle? And what we learned during the Saturn program, the Moon program, is we first started with the Saturn V engines. When an engine gets to a certain size, they end up seeing or experiencing flame, what do we call it, deflections. And that leads to blowing up the engines. And it's kind of hard to see at this angle, but there's pairs of holes, injectors. And injectors they come in pairs. There'll be an oxidizer. And
Tiny little holes we're
little
talking
holes.
about.
There's
there.
hundreds and
Two
hundreds
side
of
by
them.
side there.
There's an oxidizer and a fuel. And they're inserted at an angle into the base plate. And the reason they do that is it comes out as a liquid, and what they want is for that fluid to come up and they hit each other, and that process of hitting each other and combining causes it to turn into a gas, and then that you can ignite that, and you get your thrust from it. Now the Russians know this, but they didn't want to use this for a certain reason. These pairs in here, to put the what you see is a circle and the arms going out, those are deflectors, vanes to control the flame. And to put that in there, you end up covering up holes that should be used for fuel. And so if this covers 10% of the area, you lose 10% of your thrust. So they didn't want to do that. So what they did is this is a single chamber. And the Saturn V F1 engine was the largest single chamber engine that's ever been built. Now, the Russians that they used back on the one with the 4 nozzles, those engines are actually more powerful than the F1 engine. And it can't just, but it's called a 4-chamber rocket. And what they decided is 4 small ones, they don't need to have those baffles in there. So they get 100% out of each engine. So they become very, very powerful. Now this is the base. Looking back up at the Buran and the Energia, and you can see this platform that they're going to rotate, and you can see the engine bells sticking through that.
I'm going to take it off there, Gary, to show the background picture here
Yeah.
on the green screen.
Yeah.
We're looking at the bottom,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, the bottom of that is they tilt,
Of you.
and that's what they launch off of, right there. And then the reason they had to go vertical to put them in there is because they got to go in a compartment, like basically into a hole, and so that didn't lend itself to at this height that they stand off the ground to be put in horizontally. So you have this huge lifting device that's on top of that pad that they do remove that before launch. But you can see it as it rolls out. It takes 4 diesel locomotives.
There's 2 of them on the left.
Yeah,
there.
2 on the left. There's 2 on the left and 2 on the right. The Russians love railroad tracks, and so there's 2 parallel tracks that goes everywhere, and they use those diesel locomotives to transport it. You can see it there going out to the pad, and then there's big hydraulic arms on there to help raise it up. The technology and the engineering and the cost of doing that is phenomenal, I think.
And we just can't wait to see our Artemis 2 go out there. It ain't going to look nothing like that.
Yeah, that's
but
right. It's a lot simpler of a deal. So
There's the picture on our
Yeah.
back screen there. So
Now-
we're going to talk now about the heat shield, the
Now,
tiles.
the Buran flew only 2 orbits, and the reason I think they flew 2 orbits is they didn't have any fuel cells to provide electricity, so they had a pallet in the payload bay full of batteries. So I think the limitation for how long they stay in orbit was the battery power. So, and I don't even believe they opened up the payload bay doors during that flight.
Now, can I just back up and just reinforce to everybody out there It flew uncrewed.
Yeah.
All right. So what controlled it?
It's either it was controlled from the ground or it was all computerized and it was all in the program, and then it flew. Now, when it came in, I was telling you before, they had the people on the ground and monitoring were surprised. They got a big surprise. The Buran was coming in. It was coming in too fast. So to slow down and make the landing, it made a deviation out and back and around a little bit to give it time to slow down a little bit, and that caught them totally by surprise. They didn't think that was going to happen.
But Buran had a brain to automatically do
Yes.
that.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with the shuttle did.
Yeah.
It could do the same thing the shuttle could do.
And those were the
before.
S curves that are famous.
Well, the
around here.
shuttle when it comes in, they call it a hack, and when it comes in, the computer is analyzing airspeed versus distance, and they have a hack which was a circle. It would come around, and they always flew those. And what they would do is if they were coming in too slow, then they could tighten that circle up. And so they calculated what the energy was required to get to that point on the ground. If they were going too fast, then they would fly out further on that hack. So that's how they did it. I don't believe the Russians utilized that. They just didn't sound like it.
Well, when it landed, it had some damage.
Well, and it's hard to find pictures. There isn't any post pictures on the ground. I did find a video that had some stuff in there. And this is the RCC panels first, and then the upper side of that is the tile. Now, the report that came out after it landed was there was so much structural damage to the leading edge because they miscalculated and didn't build a good enough RCC panel. And then there was a lot of tile damage. It doesn't show up. They didn't have gap fillers. And so they had a lot of tile damage. You can see the elevon here. It looks pretty bad compared to after it got in. And the report was to repair and replace the damage that they saw. This is almost a burn through right here on their wing. Is that it was cheaper to build another shuttle than it was to repair it.
Comparing this burn through on Buran to STS 27,
Yeah.
which was infamous for a close call.
Yeah, it was close.
Yeah.
Hoot Gibson had told his crew that they may not live through it, and it was a burn through, not a burn through, but he saw on pictures that they had some severe damage because it was classified.
It was a classified.
He couldn't
DoD
send. He
mission.
couldn't send the clear unclassified picture. And going through the classified system, it took a very long time, and it also was not very clear. Mm-hmm. And Houston kept saying, we don't see anything worth worrying about. And he was concerned that they weren't seeing what he did. And when he started to re-enter, he monitored the elevons because he knew if there was a burn through, the elevons would start trying to correct the yaw and roll. And as long as they stayed neutral, he was okay, and he kept monitoring that all the way down and telling the crew every so many seconds, we're still good. So it was quite interesting. And the only reason it didn't burn through is there was an communications antenna plate that was behind it, so it gave an extra thick layer of material there, so it did not burn through because they were very, very lucky.
Great story about the great Hoot Gibson. Jerry Ross was part of that crew. I've heard him talk about that close call before. Here's more of damage on the Buran there.
Buran did have tile damage.
It's just kind of like a scorch marks.
Yes, it is.
On there. So thought we'd talk a little bit about they had to have a way to get that off and on, and
this is their equivalent to our mate demate device that we have here. It had at Kennedy Space Center. That's no longer there. It's not as complex and structural as ours. It's still out there. It's on their run. It's at their runway.
in a famous transporter
Yeah.
plane.
Yeah, this is the Antovia, I think is how you pronounce that.
ANTO.
Yeah.
Antovia.
Anyway, it's 225. They have two versions. They have one with just the 4 engines, which NASA still uses to transport large items to the Space Center, either the Air Force or to NASA. I've seen them fly over our house already. in the past. But this was a special one that could carry the shuttle on it. It had 6 engines. Now, it was built in Ukraine. That was the manufacturer. And it was brought back there and put in a hangar. And then when the Russians invaded Ukraine, that first week, they for some reason, they sent a rocket into that hangar, and they totally destroyed that AN-225. And everybody in the world is crying because that was the largest airplane that was manufactured, except for the one that's got the 2 fuselages, and I think it's got 6 engines. I forget who's doing it out in California. I don't know where it's going, but anyway, this did fly, and it made it to the Paris Air Show with the brand on it for display. So it's a very, very famous airplane.
Marty's got a question for you, Gary.
Okay.
Yeah, Daniel D'Amato is asking, what, if any, differences were there in Buran's tiles versus the shuttles?
Good question. Thank you. There is a difference, you told me.
Well, yes, we use silicon on it, and they use quartz, which I guess is a similar type thing, but their quartz came from Brazil. And so that's what they used. And as far as the makeup of it, I don't know. I do know at the time that when they took tours through the Lockheed plant that was manufacturing the tiles, the Russians they were going through had special shoes that had they were soft on them, sticky, and they were looking to pick up pieces of the tile.
So why would Russians be going through Lockheed Martin's facility?
Well, this was back when everybody was kind of they were friendly, but they did go through one of the plants, and that was reported back on the news back then.
Wow,
so
interesting. Good question. Yes, well, they use quartz. We use silica. Basically, they tell you it's sand and air is what.
Now they align their tiles different than we did. We used angles and different shapes. They were all square shaped, and the way they laid them out was in rows, and the large row was perpendicular to the airflow. It was actually supposedly was more streamlined than what we had.
Well, I've enjoyed listening to Gary talk about a passion of his following the legends of the Buran space shuttle. Buran is translated to what?
Snowstorm or blizzard.
Yes, correct.
Or snow,
yeah. And we're going to end our little program here with the fate of Buran and actually what it was designed to be used for. I think it's going to flip you out when you see what Russia had in mind. But first, here's the building it was housed in.
This is the building number 1, the one that processed the segment of the strap-ons in the main segment. And after Buran got back, they put it on another Energia, and they put it in this building. And the building was not being maintained, and there was a huge rainstorm that came in, and the roof was leaking, and so I sent a crew of 8 people up there to repair it. And during that process, it caved in. It killed all 8 of those technicians. And it destroyed the this is what it would have looked like it was in there, and they used it for people could come and look at it. Basically, is what they were doing. But once that happened, you can see how the roof fell in, killing the 8 people, and destroying the Buran. It was totally destroyed. And I think there's a nose section that's sitting out in the weather someplace. But this is, you can see the 2 of the strap-ons in the center tank. That I call it a tank. It's not. It's actually it's powered, so it sits in there. And eventually, the other buildings are going to do the same because they're not maintaining them at all.
So
now they do have security people patrol, and some of these people that go out there and risk their going there do get captured or caught, and then they get processed, and usually they get released. Sometimes they have to pay a fine, but they do risk getting caught. And there's cases where you'll watch them when they're doing it. They'll hear a noise or hear a car, and people will come in and look for them, but they're hiding in there somewhere.
What a cat and mouse game there is. Hope that Carlton Bailey's been enjoying this. I know Tom Usiak has. Regular Cynthia Rossi's watching. Hey, Gary Folsom's watching today, Marty.
Yep.
Saw Gary out to Space Center today. You're looking good, my friend. Dave Stengy's up in Michigan. Doug Forrest is one of our artists that's going to talk at the Shuttle Fest 2 a week from Saturday. Charlene Walker's watching. Darby Phillips Miller, good business friend of mine here on the Space Coast.
And Bill Whiting.
Yep, you met Bill Whiting,
Yeah.
John Darlington, Hazel Banks, our Apollo secretary, Z. Rubin. Glad you're watching. Bennett Scarborough's watching. Paul Hickson and Dano Damano. Thank you for your question,
Yes, sir.
Dano. You're not going to believe what Gary's going to tell you next to end our program that was intended to be used for this space shuttle.
Now this is a picture with a concept picture they have that shows, with the radiators on it and they're deployed, which we never did deploy them. Back towards the vertical tail, you'll see a round object, and that is their docking radar, and I don't know if it's a communication satellite.
On
but
the stick up there.
on the
post,
stick, yeah. And of course, they don't have the ohm spots, but they do have the engines back there. They do show here a airlock, and that would be a docking system. And there was one in the prototype. It was in the hangar there that you have. And for some reason, they're showing pictures of the Elevons with suit on them from the engines from someplace, which has never happened. Now this is where
Here's the amazing thing.
they were considering they were going to have a rotisserie in there, and they'd have 2 sets of these with 5 of these little lifting bodies that would be crewed, and this is a cross section concept, and one has already been deployed, and then it would rotate out around, and then the next one would be deployed, and it would continue till they were empty. And the object with these was to glide down over the United States and drop hydrogen bombs on the United States. And there
information from great friend of ours and Stay Curious, Gary Allgire, never fails to bring some amazing facts and interest.
So,
and there's where the final resting
Rest
place
place
of
is.
the prototype, and then
uh,
Little Bird.
Little Bird, and also
Yeah.
I've heard it
Don't start
called
playing Leonard Skinner behind me there.
Yeah.
It's not Free Bird, it's Little Bird.
And also
It's
they some people pronounce it as it was Tempest was the name of it. So
it
I
was
guess
really designed to service the Mir space station,
yeah.
is what the notes there I found.
Okay.
Did you hear that, Gary?
No, I didn't hear that because this is as far as I got with my research.
Mhm.
And
Well, Gary, thank you very much. Marty, any final questions from our fabulous watchers today?
Nope, no more questions.
Good. Well, Gary, thank you so much. So
welcome.
interesting.
Yeah.
This might be the last program for you until the fall, but I'm going to stay in touch with you as he enjoys his beautiful cabin situation up in Georgia in the spring and summertime. But thank you so much. You've really, I think, enlightened a lot of us out there with your expertise there. He's just like Terry White and Mikey Haddad, sharing their time to share with you some things about the American space program and today about the Russian space program. So, Gary, best to you again, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Anything
Enjoy.
you wanted to add before we
Well,
say goodbye?
I guess looking at their program and the way their facilities are, they never had an OPF like we had an OPF. They really
Orbital
couldn't
processing
facility. They didn't have any capability to have a clean room that I noticed for experimentals, if that's what they're going to use it for. Again, it was more of a weapon system that they were looking at. They had no way. There was no access at the pad in the payload bay. Like we did. We didn't have the rotating service structures where we could put payloads in at the pad. Because most of the payloads that flew on the shuttle wanted to go in at the pad. They either wanted to have the cleanliness that the pad provided, whereas the OPF could not be as clean. They wanted to go in at the last possible minute.
Animals and so forth.
Well, not even that, but the military definitely wanted to go in at late in the count as they could. And a lot of the other payloads did too. They just didn't like it sitting around with nobody working on it and doing anything, or they had requirements to have late access to serve or something, charge a battery or whatever. So that gave us the capability. And the scientific community loved the shuttle because when we came back from the moon and Apollo, it was out in the ocean. It took days for anything to get back to them. Whereas when the shuttle landed, within hours, they could get access to their payload, their experiments, and get it back before it got contaminated either from the gravity or from the atmosphere or whatever. So they really love flying on the shuttle. At least that's the feedback we always got from the scientific community.
Well, we love Gary talking about the shuttle, and again, appreciate your contribution to the American Space Museum and our U.S. Space Walk of Fame Foundation. Those of you looking for a tax break, you can go to our website, and we'll give you the legal documents and so forth to help our humble nonprofit out here. Gary, you've been a fabulous docent.
Yeah.
We're going to miss that part of you. What did you enjoy about docenting this?
I've enjoyed it because I get to relive my past, and it seems so far that the people I talk to really enjoy the stories that I have about how we processed the Apollo program and how we did it at the shuttle. Mm-hmm. And I've had cases where they will listen to me for 4 hours, and I have had to actually almost chase them out.
Well, we're going to miss that. If you were lucky enough to have him give a docent tour here, you're great. We've got other people here like Gordon and Barry.
They do a great job.
And
I'm not going to take away anything
Steve
from them.
and so forth. They all got their little niches in there, but we appreciate what you bring, and have a great time in the summer with your wife, and I'll be in touch with you over the,
I'll be glad
the
to hear
journey
from you.
here.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Marty, thank you for a tremendous job today and
Especially
overcoming some problems,
Yes.
but we persevered and met our second launch date today. So for everybody, we're going to get back Friday, TGIF. We're going to be talking about some of those 16 space shuttles that were launched in the month of April. And until then, I'm Marquette saying I can't wait to see you again to bridge the space between us.